Okay? Yep. Perfect. So these first couple of things are just going to be like little correctives for what I did before. Okay? Fortunately, you haven't heard them yet, so it won't bore the crap out of you. Hold on, I just want to turn this so it's a little clear. Okay. Okay. All right, sound should still be pretty good. Okay, so when Odysseus leaves where the hell does he leave? When Odysseus leaves the Cyclops and he ends up, okay, I got to think about this to get back on track for a second. When Odysseus and his men end up leaving the Cyclops, they're blown and they row to the King of the Winds. And the King of the Winds, whose name is Aeolus, is there with his family. They have all of the winds, his children are all of the winds. And they wine and they dine, and they're perfect hosts to Odysseus and to his crew. And Odysseus, after a year, so again, kind of a full cycle, asks that he be able to find his way home to Ithaca. And what the King of the Winds does is he puts all of the winds into a bag and ties it up tight, and then sends Odysseus on his way with only the one wind that's going to blow him directly to Ithaca. And what happens is Odysseus is wide awake. He doesn't tell any of his crew members what's in the bag. So as they get close to being to Ithaca, they're within sight of Ithaca. And they get close, they see it, and Odysseus decides he just can't sleep. He can't stay awake anymore. He doesn't decide that. He just can't stay awake anymore. And he falls asleep. And his crew members all get together and say, I wonder what's in that bag. He always gets the best of everything. All of the gifts are to him. I'll bet there's gold. That bag weighs so much. And Odysseus, with sweet sleep having laid him into slumber, his crew members open up the bag and they let all of the winds out, and it blows the ship basically to smithereens. It sends it sailing and flying. It batters it. It breaks it apart, sends all of the crew flying back to the land of Aeolus, to the king. Odysseus goes up onto the shore and explains to Aeolus, please give me a second chance. This is, if we think about it in modern times with the return of the veteran, we can think of Aeolus as a kind of a benefactor. As a benefactor. This is someone who's given the veteran a chance, gives him work, gives him a job, and somehow the veteran themselves can't quite make it work. Through no fault of their own, they just almost can't get out of their own way to make it work. That might sound a little too insulting, but so I'm probably going to cut that part out. But we can think of Aeolus as a benefactor, and the veteran has come. The benefactor has given him a chance, and he blows it. Right? Odysseus blows it, and he comes back, begs Aeolus for a second chance, who says, clearly you're cursed, I'm sorry, I can't give you any more chances, get the hell out of here, get off of my island, the gods obviously don't want you to go home. And they are blown, and they get in the boat, and they row like hell, and they get off the land of Aeolus, who had done such a favor for them, but they just couldn't make it. From there, they go to the Westragonians, and these are cannibals, but they don't know that. So what Odysseus does is he sends 3 people, 2 men and a slave, and he sends them up to explore who lives in this palace that they can see. And when the 3 go up, they come across a well with a young girl at the well. She's described in a way that's not quite clear if it's that she's very big, but basically she's a hardy young girl. And they ask her, where are the king and queen who rules this land? And the young girl at the well, which is of course a mythic motif that we see in the testamentary literature too, is a man goes and meets a girl at a well, or meets a young woman at a well, takes them up to the palace to meet her parents. Turns out, of course, she's the princess. When they go into the palace, they meet the queen, who is larger than life. She is a gigantus, is what she's called. The men are terrified of her. She calls to the king, who comes out and picks up each of the two men and eats them. Just picks them up and eats them. And the third is terrified, comes screaming back. The Lestrygonians come chasing after them all, throwing rocks at them all. The level of cannibalism is terrifying for all of them. They get back in the ship and they leave the island, having lost several of their men, unfortunately, leaving several of their men behind. So the idea of the giant feminine, the giant masculine, these are powers of an ancient race. The race of the giants comes before the race of the Titans in Greek mythology. So these people are enormous and they are devouring. So we can understand them as a devouring ego. They are the devouring rulers of the kingdom, and that is the rule of the land. Okay, so we leave the Lestrygonians. We spoke about going to the island of Circe. They now land on the island of Circe. And in landing on the island of Circe, they see there's a large stag that comes by, and Odysseus and his men understand that as a portent from the gods that they are meant to feast on this animal. They shoot the animal, they take it down, and they marvel at the size of this stag. There's something about this stag that seems almost otherworldly in its enormity. They thank the gods for it, they make it into a meal, they all feast, and then Odysseus and one of his other trusted crew members, Eurylochus, the two of them draw straws as to who's going to lead their men up to see who inhabits this island. They look up the hill, they see smoke rising from a house, a large house, and so they know somebody is there. Eurylochus basically ends up with the short straw, and he leads his group of men up to see who is in the palace, who's in this house. As they get closer, there are wild animals all over. They're roaming, and they're kind of curious about it. These animals seem to come up to them. They're friendly. They don't seem to be threatening in any way. They're not actually behaving in the way you'd expect wild animals to behave. The men get as far as the door, and they call to the beautiful woman inside. The beautiful woman inside is the sorceress Circe. She is stunning. She sees them out there. They call to her. She invites them in. Eurylochus is smart enough to stay outside. He stays at the door and he watches. As his men go in, Circe welcomes them. She seats them. She gives them wine. What they don't realize is the wine is enchanted. So she's put a certain poison into the wine, and that poison is going to turn them into pigs. And before Eurylochus's eyes, he's watching, and he sees his men suddenly grow hair and grow snouts, and they turn into pig bodies, even though their minds are just fine. So their minds are just the same as they were before, but trapped inside a pig's body. From this, you can sort of assume, as men are coming back from war, up to now, they've treated women as chattel, and as someone to have sex with, to conquest, to take home as a prize, the beautiful women. But now, if the men are behaving like animals and behaving like pigs in front of this beautiful woman, Circe, we can sort of know that that's the metaphor for what's occurring. So they are turned into pigs, they're sent off to a sty, she throws them some food, the kinds that pigs would root in the ground for, and they go off. Eurylochus is freaked out. Eurylochus runs back to the ship as fast as he can. He's breathless, he's frightened, and he explains what's occurred, which gets Odysseus very angry. He's angry. He decides that what he's going to do is he's going to go up and get his men back, and he's kind of all dressed in armor again. And everybody is frightened. They're sobbing. They're worried that, of course, now their fearless leader, Odysseus, is also going to meet the same fate. And what about the other men? Right? They are now sobbing for the loss of their shipmates. They've been through so much with them. So Circe is up in her palace with these men who she's sent off to the sty. Odysseus gets all dressed up in his armor. He starts up the walk up to Circe's palace, and along the way, Hermes, the god. Hermes is one of the communicator gods. He's the orator. He's got his other name, so Hermes is kind of hidden. So things that are hermetically sealed come from that name, from Hermes, things that are tucked away and hidden. His Roman name is Mercury, so it's mercurial. A mercurial personality is one that you can't quite get a hold of. It's going up and down. If you think about the metal mercury that some of us played with when we were kids, it doesn't really have a shape, right? It's the one element that's neither and all at once. It's a liquid, it's a solid, and it's a gas. So this god, the communicator god, Mercury or Hermes, comes down and meets Odysseus on the path. And Odysseus says, I'm going to Circe to get my men back. And Hermes says, she's going to enchant you just like the others. Hermes reaches down and he pulls a plant out of the ground. And the plant is called moly. It's translated to be M-O-L-Y. It's not really clear what this plant is. Ethnobotanists have been looking for years, and anthropologists kind of wondering what exactly was this plant. But in our story, we know Hermes hands it to Odysseus and says, here's what you have to do. And what Hermes proceeds to do is explain how can Odysseus meet Circe, a powerful woman, on her own terms, not be enchanted, not be bewitched by her, but also kind of take his own stand, but treat her respectfully. And what Hermes says is when you get there, I want you to have the moly, have taken it in, get there, she's going to call you in. When she calls you in, I want you she's going to offer you the drink, but it won't enchant you because you've now got my protection, right? You've got this protection of the god from this plant. And so Odysseus does that, he goes in, he takes the drink, and the rest of what Hermes has said to him is when you take that drink and it doesn't enchant you, quickly pull out your sword and threaten her as though you're going to kill her. It's going to frighten her. She's going to be so frightened that you now need to say, this is what I need, this is who I am, and this is what I need from you. And then Hermes explains that you must go to bed with her. She is going to invite you into her bed to make sweet love, which Circe does. And Odysseus is to say, how can I expect that you're not going to unman me while we're in bed? Right? What's to say that we're not going to be in bed and in that moment of vulnerability that you're not going to unman me, to castrate me? And Circe says, and Odysseus insists that Circe give her word that she intends him no harm. And that's what happens. She gives her word, she intends no harm. And they also, a little while later, after having now met on equal terms, right? So this is a mating of a powerful man and a powerful woman, or a powerful masculine, powerful feminine. You can think of it sort of like the meeting of the yin-yang, right? That here we've got the anima and animus are meeting, both are powerful on their own terms, and they're mating. The next thing Odysseus says is, and how can I possibly enjoy my time with you when I know that my men are all suffering and you've turned them into pigs? And Circe says, when Odysseus wasn't enchanted by the drink, Circe says, the prophecy said that a man named Odysseus would come who would not be enchanted. I'm going to pause for a second because my phone is ringing because I didn't silence it. And would you be able to just cut that out? No. You would? Oh, well, hang on. I'm just going to go ahead and show it anyway. There. Sorry. Usually I'm much more attentive about that. And given that I did start that. Good. A minute. Okay. Okay. And we're off and running again. Okay. All right. So Circe now promises that not only will she not unman Odysseus, but she also promises that she will now turn all of the men back into their rightful body shape. And she has a certain lotion, a certain salve, a magical potion again, that she touches them and their hair falls away, the snouts shrink, they come back into their standing full height as men. They get down on their knees, they hug Odysseus, they are prayerful, they're grateful, they're weeping with each other, and so grateful to now be back in their form. And as you might imagine, they have a great deal of respect now for this woman, for the sorceress who has enchanted them. So now Odysseus goes back down to the men and entreats them to come up and promises that everything will be fine now. And after a fair bit of persuasion, indeed, everyone comes up. They're wined and dined in the home of Circe, and it's a lovely time for, again, a full cycle until the men say, okay, Odysseus, we've been here long enough. It's time to continue our journey home. But by now, Odysseus has learned proper balance and proper respect for the feminine, right? I mean, Circe is a goddess, but they're meeting on equal terms. Odysseus has drawn his sword, right? This is what Hermes said, and has gotten her to agree. So he's basically taken out his manhood and used it to basically say, listen, you can't enchant me. I am dealing with you, you're dealing with me, and we're co-equals in this, even though, of course, Circe is a goddess and Odysseus is not a god. So Odysseus approaches and says, okay, it's time, we want to start to go home. And Circe says, okay, you can go home, but I'm going to tell you that first you're going to have to go to the underworld. And Odysseus just is stunned by this. His men haven't heard that. But what Circe says is you've got to go to the underworld and speak to Tiresias. Tiresias is the prophet. He's the blind seer that we often see we see kind of that archetype of a blind seer. Sometimes in Shakespeare, we often see him in Homer. Homer himself is blind, right? Or the person we presume to be Homer, the one thing scholars can agree on is that Homer is a blind poet or a blind bard. Tiresias getting blind, however, is a bit of a different story. But Circe says you've got to go down, you've got to see Tiresias, and he will tell you how it is you can get home. So a couple of things about Tiresias, as I've been kind of drawing the thread of the masculine-feminine balance here, really throughout the whole story. So when you think about in Once Upon a Time, certainly before women were in the military, we had the men as warriors who now needed to come back, and during the war times, really treated women as prizes of war. The beautiful women were the prizes of war. And women were certainly honored for their beauty and prized and treasured for their beauty. I just lost why I even said that. All right, so we're gonna hit the pause button personally. Okay, so what Circe explains is you've got to go to the underworld and see Tiresias. So why Tiresias? Tiresias, as a young boy, as a young boy, he goes into the woods and he sees two serpents mating, and he hits them with a stick, and instantly the punishment for that is he's turned into a girl. He spends the next 7 years living in a girl's body as a young girl, and again, 7 years later, he goes into the forest and he sees two serpents mating. There are different stories about how does he respond to that now. But the one that I particularly like, or one of the many, is he sees them and he now honors what's happening. They're copulating and he honors that. And in that moment, he is again turned back into a man. So he's lived both sides of the masculine feminine. That's really important, of why Tiresias. But why is he blind? This is actually a bit more fun story. So Zeus and Hera, the thunder god, the god of sky or sky god, and his consort Hera, who is his sister as well as his wife, she is the divine goddess of marriage, the one who holds marriage most sacred, are having an argument over who gets more enjoyment from sex. Who gets more enjoyment from intercourse? Zeus says clearly women do. Hera says clearly men do. And Zeus decides to call Tiresias to ask him, because Tiresias has lived both sides of this. Unfortunately, poor Tiresias is really stuck in a bind. Who do you agree with? Who do you disagree with? The gods can be pretty foul-tempered when you don't agree with them. He declares that Zeus is correct. And instantly, Hera blinds him because she's so angry about this decision, having been decided against. So, Tiresias, right? The thing is that Zeus now, of course, can't undo what Hera's done. So, Tiresias is going to be blind, but what Zeus can do is increase the power of his hearing and give him the gift of understanding the song of the birds. So he's able to read portents and omens differently from others and he has this enhanced prophecy, ability to prophesize, ability to see more clearly. Circe explains, Odysseus, you and your men are going to have to go to the underworld. She explains to them exactly what they need to do. They need to bring a stag and a ewe, and she brings them brings the animals to them. You need to sacrifice them in a certain way, in a certain path, in a certain trough, just outside the gates of hell. And once the blood is in that trough of these sacred of the animals that have been sacrificed, you've got to sit there with your sword, and the different wraiths, the different spirits are going to come forward. The spirits of the dead and the souls of the dead are going to come forward and want to drink that blood, because when they drink that blood, they're revivified. They're given life again, even ever so briefly. But, Circe explains, do not let anybody drink that blood until Tiresias comes forward. Odysseus blows the horn. He calls, I don't know that he blows the horn. Odysseus calls to everybody saying, okay, it's time for us to go on the boat. When he does that, the youngest member of the crew, poor Elpenor, they've had a drunken feast the night before. Elpenor has gone up onto the roof to sleep in a drunken stupor. He hears this call that it's time to, from Odysseus, it's time to get in the boats, we're leaving. Elpenor sort of wakes up. He's a bit hungover. We can imagine him sort of stumbling, but he falls off the roof, he breaks his neck, and he dies. They are sad about that, but they don't stop, the rest of the crew. The rest of the crew, Odysseus says, okay, we're getting in the boats. And they get in the boats, but Odysseus never tells them where they're going, because he knows that if he tells them they're going to the underworld, they would never go. There would be an insurrection, because who wants to go to that really deep, dark place in any of our souls? That said, every hero, Hercules, every hero has to go to the underworld, right? In order to, in Carl Jung's idea, the idea of individuation, that in order to grow up and become who you're going to be, you really have to face your deepest, darkest, difficult aspects, and that would be the underworld. So Odysseus, they're now in the boat. The two animals are there, the ewe and the lamb, and the other animals that are going to be sacrificed. And now Odysseus explains to everybody what they're doing and why they have to go to the underworld. They go, they get there. When they do, he does all of the sacrifices and provides all of the abeyance to the god. And all of these different shades come forward. All of these different spirits come forward. So many, it's women, it's children, all of people he recognizes, people he doesn't. Elpenor comes forward, and Odysseus says, what happened? And Elpenor explains what happened, that he fell off the roof, but he also says, when you leave here, please, I implore you to go back to the island of Circe and bury me correctly and burn my body. Burn my body, take care of me correctly, so that my spirit can leave my body and can go into the underworld, so I'm not caught in a limbo place. Odysseus says he will do that. And in the meantime, we've got all of these other wraiths trying to come forward. Odysseus is sitting there with his sword. He sees that his mother is there, Anticlea. But Anticlea, he didn't know his mother was dead. He can't even let her come to drink the blood, even though his heart is desperate to hold and to hug his mother again. He hasn't seen her in 20 years, and he hadn't known that she had died. There are so many women and children and others coming forward to drink this blood that ultimately Queen Persephone, the queen of the underworld, has to come and push them all aside and create a path so that Tiresias can now come forward. Tiresias does drink the blood, and he explains to Odysseus that what he needs to do in order to get home safely is the next thing he's got to do is he's got to go basically to the other end of the world, to the island of the sun god. So this is Helios, the sun. He's the driver. He is understood to be both the sun and the driver of the chariot that carries the sun. But he tells Odysseus, you've got to go there. When you are there, there are sacred cattle on that island. You and your men must not touch them. Don't hurt them. They are sacred to the sun. So there's sort of the sacred cow, right? There's a phrase that we, of course, have. In Egyptian, we find their sacred cows of the mother goddess. But we also have these cows that are the cattle that are being held sacred to Helios, and they're being taken care of by his daughters, Phaethusa and Lampetia. And I'll show you some of the photos of them or the images of them. After that, Odysseus has some dialogue back and forth with Tiresias, and Tiresias says, if those cattle are touched, if anything happens, you'll still get home, but the gods will make it very difficult, and you will have lost everything. And then Tiresias fades back off again, and now Odysseus lets Anticlea come forward, his mother. And he learns that his mother died of a broken heart when he left. When Odysseus left, his mother just couldn't tolerate it. Now, Odysseus didn't leave of his own will. This was a promise that all of the kings had made to go fight for the sanctity of the marriage between Menelaus and Helen. But his mother died of a broken heart just the same. Odysseus does ask his mother about Penelope, his wife. Has she been faithful? Anticlea says, yes, she's been faithful. There are suitors at your home trying to eat you out of house and home. Odysseus asks about Telemachus, his child, and Anticlea speaks about him as well. Everybody is healthy. Laertes has gone off to live elsewhere, or we'll leave Laertes out of that, so forget that. But Penelope and Telemachus we hear about. Then the different war heroes come forward, right? We have Agamemnon, who comes forward and tells this terrible story of having won the war as the king of the Greeks. He goes home only to be murdered by his wife Clytemnestra and her lover, Aegisthus. And he hears this terrible story, and then Agamemnon goes off. Ajax, who at the end of the Trojan War, Ajax and Odysseus and several others are basically having fighting like Olympian games over who's going to win the armor of Achilles. The gods decide for Odysseus. Ajax is so angry that even now in the underworld, Ajax will not come anywhere near Odysseus. Most stories tell us that Ajax has committed suicide. We can speak about that another time. But Ajax was almost the profound image of PTSD. In the story written by Euripides, Ajax really comes apart, but we're actually going to leave that whole part out about Ajax. Ajax just won't speak to Odysseus. He's angry. He's off in the back, and Odysseus notes that, speaks to him, but Ajax just walks off. Achilles approaches and wants to know about his son. Well, Achilles' son has won all sorts of honors during the Trojan War, so Achilles feels great about that. But Odysseus says, you know, you've died with all of these honors. Everybody loved you and thought you were the greatest hero ever. And Achilles says, I would trade one day, even as a worker in the fields of somebody else, just to have one more day in the sunshine and of life, rather than this. So it's this extraordinary moment where we see Achilles really honor the sacrifice, and any of the dead warriors really honor the sacrifice of kind of that idea that glory comes in the afterlife. It's now time for Odysseus to leave. He and his men get back in the ship, and they take off again. They do go back to the island of Circe, back to Aea, it's called. They go back to the land of Circe to bury Elpenor, and to burn his body, to bury him, to have proper burial rites then. Circe now explains, Circe and Odysseus have the conversation of what did Tiresias tell you. Odysseus says we now have to go to the land of the sun, so really two ends of the earth, right, from the underworld all the way to the ends of the earth to the sun, and explains about the cattle. And Circe says, okay, to get there, you've got two things that you've got to pass that both can really threaten you. One is the land of the sirens. The sirens, the siren call, a lot of you might have heard of that. The sirens are on an island. They are women singing these beautiful siren songs, probably understood to be the songs of history, right, of storytelling of history. The island is littered with the bones of people who have gotten caught there telling their old story and not ever being really able to move forward. What Circe says is you've got to take beeswax and put it into the ears of every one of your crew members, all of the rowers, have to have their ears stuffed solid so they can't hear any of this. Beeswax is interesting because the bee was a sacred animal. It was understood to be sort of an interesting story because the queen bee was understood to only give birth by what was called parthenogenesis. Right? I spoke about that with the birth of Athena. They didn't understand that actually the queen bee was having any way of fertilizing, so they assumed that she was giving virgin birth to these other bees. Right? The queen bee is the source of all of the other bees in a hive. So the idea of royal jelly, the particular jelly that's found in the hive created by the queen, in Egyptian lore and in Greek lore as well, the bee was a sacred animal. Why? Because they don't destroy their food source. When it's sort of interesting, they pollinate it, they don't destroy the food source, and in some way, right, at that time quite mysteriously, in their body, it's almost like this alchemical black box. Some change is occurring from the pollen with whatever is happening inside the bee, that honey is being produced. Honey or mead, the food of the gods, not only a sweet and wonderful food and very pure in that it's understood to come from a virgin birth, right? That was the understanding of that, but also a phenomenal antibacterial. Pure honey was and is an excellent antibacterial. So we have the beeswax. The other thing about the bees is that the hive, when you look at a beehive, what you're seeing is a bunch of hexagons. So six-sided, very stable building blocks of the hive itself. But if you look at some of the ancient symbols, like from the Seal of Solomon or what we know as the Star of David, and people will often ask, so why do you see the Star of David in ancient cultures long before the Judeo-Christian world even begins? I mean, you see it as far as in India, you see it way back in iconography. It's building off a hexagon, right? It's a six-pointed star building off a hexagon. So it just makes for an interesting interrelationship between the idea of a sacred notion, the sacred feminine, the bee, parthenogenesis, the food. It's just a phenomenal set of connections. So the men are being now protected by the sacred feminine, right? By the great feminine. They all have beeswax stuck in their ears. And Circe also says, get your men to lash you to the mast. You have to hear them. You can listen to the sirens. But no matter what you tell your men, no matter what you do, no matter how loud you scream, no matter how much you wriggle, they should not and they cannot let you go and redirect the ship to go to the island of the sirens, because the sirens, again, are the story of your history, right? I mean, it's easy for many of us, and certainly veterans as well, to kind of get lost in the old glory of the story. And while those stories are very important and really important for all of us to hear, what this story is kind of warning us is the possibility that a returning warrior can get lost there and die there and never make it home. So it's an interesting thing. So Circe says, okay, so you have to get past the sirens. She said, and then you have two choices. Your two choices are you can either go through what are called the Symplegades or the clashing rocks, which is what Jason and the Argonauts do, is they go through these clashing rocks, or you can go past Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla and Charybdis being two feminine gods. Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla is a six-headed monster who lives in a cave. She's the child of chaos, of one of the goddesses of chaos. Her six heads are dog's heads, and she is fierce and ferocious, and she lives up in a cave. And in this narrow isthmus that they need to pass through, one side is Scylla with this monstrous goddess living in the cave, and the other side is Charybdis, which is a whirlpool that sucks everything down and destroys it and belches things back up every number of hours throughout the day. So those are the two choices. Either go through the clashing rocks, which, as I said, Jason and the Argonauts had to time. How do they go through there? They sent a bird through, and when it was only the last tail feathers of the bird that get caught, they could catch the timing of these rocks that were coming and going, and the Argonauts made it through. Odysseus chooses for Scylla and Charybdis. Not a good choice. I mean, both of these are bad choices, right? But it's another way of thinking about caught between a rock and a hard place. He's got to make a decision. Circe tells him that if you get close to Scylla, do it very quietly. Don't dress up in all of your armor. Don't think you can take her on. She is a vicious and ferocious goddess. And try to get through losing as few men as you can. She will probably get 6 of them. Right? She's got 6 heads. That's your one choice. The other choice is if you go by Charybdis, you lose everything. So which way do you go? Well, you know, truly a rock and a hard place decision. So, and both destructive feminine forces in this story. Odysseus does tell his men about the sirens. They now leave Circe's island again, and they are headed to Helios, to the land of Helios, to the sacred cattle. And he tells them about the sirens, and he does exactly what he's told to do, right? They lash him to the mast. He can't move. They row and row and row. He hears the siren song, but he doesn't pull over for it because all of his men are protected. They all have beeswax in all of their ears. Once they are safely past all of that, and they see all of the bones of all the people who have been lost there and died on that island. Once they get past that, they continue. Now Odysseus is unlashed, and their wax is removed from their ears, and now they continue. He doesn't tell them about Scylla and Charybdis, because he knows that if he tells them that, they're going to pull back, they won't row, they'll do any number of things to try to not go through there, because some number of them are going to die. But Odysseus has to get, they are trying to get home, they're trying to get back to Ithaca, and there's no other way to do this. So, Odysseus, as they are approaching, Odysseus does dress in his armor. He ignores what Circe said. He stands up on the prow of the ship and gets close to Scylla. She sees them coming. She snags 6 of his sailors from the boat, pulls them up. They are screaming his name as they are lifted up and swallowed down by this monstrous monster, Scylla. The men are in shock. Obviously, the other rowers are in shock. And now they row like hell to get through there. They've lost half their men, right? They've lost 6. They mourn, they're upset, but they are also scared. And so they are now, as I said, kind of rowing like hell just to get out of there. Okay, so when they were on Circe's island, she gave them enough food and enough drink to be able to last all the journey home. They now are getting close to the land of the sacred cattle, right? There are obviously a lot of people have died along the way. So you can think of this as a lot of aspects of Odysseus' personality have been shed. So now they get as far as the island of the sun god and the cattle, and as they're approaching, the men are exhausted. They're exhausted. They're emotionally exhausted. They're physically exhausted. And it's a quiet ocean, it's a quiet sea, and Odysseus says, we just have to go past the land of the sun god. We cannot stop there. He has not told them about what Tiresias said, but they really force the issue. And again, Eurylochus stands up and says, we have to take a break. We've got to mourn for the people who have died. We're exhausted, we're starving. We just need to stop. And Odysseus relents, which he is sorry for having done, but he really feels like he just can't fight this anymore. He does relent, and he does tell the men, listen, we are going to go up there. You're going to have a lot of cattle there. Do not touch them, or we will not see home. All the men agree. They swear an oath, and they agree. They go up on the shore. They have more than ample food from Circe. They've got wine. They've got meat. They have lots of food in their stores. They are on that beach when a storm whips up at sea and now traps them on the island. There are no ways to get off. The wind is blowing and blowing and blowing. They can't possibly leave the island. The stores from Circe run out, and now they are starving. Odysseus, our hero, once again goes off to sleep. He's going to sleep. He's going to pray to the gods, of course, to ask not only for advice, but he's going to consult a deeper nature, right? He's going off, and he falls asleep. And of course, when that happens, Eurylochus says, hey, great, he's not here, we're starving, it's time to kill the cattle. Unfortunately, that's what they do. They kill the cattle, they sacrifice to the gods, the prime parts, and then they start eating, and they just can't stop. They were famished. They're famished. Lampete and Phaethusa, two of Helios's daughters, are watching. Their job was to watch over the cattle. The cattle are slaughtered. They go up to Helios, who is absolutely furious with all of this. Odysseus wakes up. He comes back down. He sees what's happened. You got all of these carcasses and corpses on the ground that start to writhe, even though they're dead. They start to move. They start to writhe. They start to make noise, and they scare the hell out of these sailors. Meantime, Helios has gone to Zeus to complain and to say, you've got to punish all of them, kill all of them, because those cattle were the joy of my life. Zeus says, well, actually, Odysseus is not at fault because Odysseus was asleep. But don't worry, I will take care of all the rest of them. Shortly, the winds die down, and now the men get back into the boat, and they're able to continue their journey. They continue their journey, but once they are back out into the water, the gods stir up a storm that lightning bolts get thrown down, and they completely destroy the ship. Everyone is dead now. Everyone is killed except Odysseus is spared. But Odysseus has lost everything. He is absolutely the hero brought low. He's lost his crew. He's lost his ship. He's lost everything. And he is hanging on to this raft for dear life when everything blows him back again to Scylla and Charybdis. He has to go back there again because for whatever, the understanding, right, of he falls asleep, this all happens, and he ends up just by himself on this small single piece of wood. But this time, when he comes close to Charybdis, he jumps up, he sees that there's a fig tree hanging that's right above the whirlpool. So we can understand his kind of going to a higher spiritual plane. Right? Up to now, he's been tossed about by the unconscious completely, but he's gone to both ends of the earth. He actually has learned something. He hops on, he holds on to that fig tree. His raft gets sucked down into Charybdis. He holds on for as long as he possibly can. I said, in this elevated spiritual place. And he waits long enough that just when his hands are about to let go, his raft gets belched back up again by Charybdis. He drops down, he lands on the raft, and he shoots out. And he ends up shooting out back to, now where he shoots to is the island of Calypso. The island of Calypso is where we've met him. We met him at the Phaeacians, where he had just come from being in the land of the eclipse. So he ends up shot out of Charybdis. He ends up on the island of Calypso, this beautiful goddess who completely falls in love with him. But he really has nothing now. He shows up there with just a raft and nothing else. So Calypso is enchanted with him. She feeds him, she makes love to him, and she wants to keep him there as her own. And he has gone through so much, he just desperately wants to make it home again. He wants to make it home. She says no, stay here forever. She promises him immortality. And all he can do is sit on the rocks and mourn for his home and watch and wait, and where is his home? So, after years of being with Calypso, we get to almost where I believe we started, which is that Athena has gone to Zeus and said, the Trojan War is 10 years over now. Everyone else has made it home except for one, and that one is Odysseus. He's still on the island of Calypso. Athena does it right at that time because Poseidon, who is still furious with Odysseus for having blinded his son Polyphemus, Poseidon's really clear that he wasn't going to let him go home at all. But Poseidon is off at a festival of the Ethiopians who are providing abeyance and honoring Poseidon. So Poseidon is not on Mount Olympus at the moment when Athena goes to her father and says, Odysseus is the only one who hasn't gone home. Zeus acquiesces and says, yes, I agree. and sends Hermes to Calypso to say the time is now to let him go home. While Hermes goes to Calypso, Athena goes to Telemachus in the guise of mentor. This is where we started the story, was the Telemachian, right? So we have, at this point, we have Telemachus, who left home to learn who he was, right? Telemachus, Odysseus' son. He went to Nestor. He also went to Menelaus and Helen, which is where he is when Hermes goes to Odysseus. Hermes goes to Odysseus and Calypso, lets Calypso know that now she needs to let Odysseus go. She needs to help him build a raft. And she gives him some clothes, and she sends him off. There's some beautiful artwork about this, and I will show that to you. And now Odysseus sets off on the raft, and he is floating for many days before he gets close to the island of the Phaeacians. He gets close to the island of Phaeacians, and right as he gets close, Poseidon says, wait a minute, you let him go without my saying it was okay, and he stirs up a sea at storm, and poor Odysseus is just hanging on for dear life. His raft is blown to bits, his clothes are blown to bits. He has no clothes, he is just in this single stick, a plank, that he's holding on to. He is just about to drown. He can see the land of the Phaeacians right there. He doesn't know what it is, but he sees land. He doesn't know who lives there, but he sees land there. And he knows that the gods had intervened to let him go home. He gets close. He goes under. Poseidon is kicking up this miserable storm at sea, this powerful storm at sea. When the sea nymph, Ino, sees Odysseus going under, she comes under, she helps him come up. She gives him a veil of invisibility. It's a cloak, and says, put this on, and basically makes him invisible to any of the forces that will keep him under there. She helps him find a quiet spot where he can actually approach the island without getting battered to bits on the rocks. And she says to him, when you land on that beach, just throw this cloak back. In some translations, it's called a wimple, which is sort of interesting because the way I know the word wimple is what a nun will wear on their head. But he's given this wimple, which is a sacred gift, of course. He lands on the beach. He throws the wimple back to Ino, and now he crawls up, no clothes, he is naked, he is completely brought low. He has lost everything, his men, his ship, his clothes. He crawls up underneath the leaves and falls fast asleep. Meantime, Athena now has gone to Telemachus to say, okay, it's time to go home. I'm going to stop recording there because I'm getting tired of talking, but we'll pick up the next part next time.